Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Nicholas Richardson and this is the news. In Berlin, Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki met the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, while at the US base of Ramstein, a meeting of defence ministers from 40 countries, including Poland's Mariusz Błaszczak, was held. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is in Moscow, where he is holding talks with, among others, Russian President Vladimir Putin. The main purpose of Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki's visit to Berlin was to mobilise the Germans to increase the supply of weapons to Ukraine, especially heavy artillery, and to tighten EU sanctions on Russia. We will certainly pay attention to the situation in Ukraine, and here, on the one hand, military aid is needed. On the other hand, humanitarian aid, but also financial aid. We would like Germany and the European Union to participate in this aid to a greater extent. This is what we are dealing with today. Meanwhile, at the US military base in Ramstein, the defence ministers of 40 countries, including Poland, met to talk about the war in Ukraine. The meeting was opened by US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin.
Ukraine needs our help to win today, and they will still need our help when the war is over. As President Biden says, our security assistance has gone directly to the front lines of freedom and to the fearless and skilled Ukrainian fighters who are standing in the breach. My Ukrainian friends, we know the burden that you all carry. And we know, and you should know, that all of us have your back. And that's why we're here today, to strengthen the arsenal of Ukrainian democracy.
Under the pressure of international public opinion, as well as strong internal criticism, the German government decided officially to hand over the Gepard anti-aircraft system to Ukraine. This is the first time that heavy equipment has been delivered by Germany to the Ukrainians during the continuing war. Yesterday, we decided to support Ukraine with anti-aircraft system Gepard, which are exactly what Ukraine needs now to secure its airspace from the ground. This has been confirmed again today. In today's conference, we will look at all the possibilities for further supporting Ukraine in its heroic and important fight for freedom and peace. In turn, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is on a peacekeeping mission to Moscow, where he spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. There was no talk of mediation, at least not for the time being. But this is the fault of the Ukrainian negotiators. Our teams met face to face. They met 3 times on the territory of Belarus and once on the territory of Turkey. These are negotiation platforms. We are grateful for their hospitality and for the organising of these talks. However, and the talk of success or progress in these talks is premature.
About the repeated reports of violations of international humanitarian and human rights law and possible war crimes, and they require independent investigation for effective accountability. The United Nations is ready to fully mobilize its human and logistical resources to help save lives in Mariupol. My proposal is for a coordinated work of the United Nations, the International Committee of the Red Cross.
During the International Raisina Dialogue Conference in India, the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Zbigniew Rau, spoke about the dilemma of European countries between fighting for the life and rights of Ukrainians and their own standards of living.
We have to overcome this dilemma in order to build a lasting European consensus. And the challenge is of this kind, that this is the time to reach this consensus and to share it with all members of the transatlantic community.
Poland has introduced sanctions against 50 Russian oligarchs, managers and Polish companies associated with them. Their Polish assets have been frozen, along with a ban on doing business in the territory of the Republic of Poland, including a ban on entry. These restrictions apply from today. As a rule, the purpose of economic sanctions is to hit the Russian economy so that Russia cannot wage war in Ukraine and to limit Russia's possibilities in this regard. The Polish sanctions list is a supplement to the European Union sanctions list. It applies to Russian oligarchs and entities that run real business in our country. The day after tomorrow, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres will travel to Kyiv for talks with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dmitry Kuleba. This is the 62nd day of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. According to the mayor of Mariupol, the Russians fired on the humanitarian corridor created for civilians from the Azovstal steelworks. In turn, in the morning, there was a shelling of Zaporizhia, a city in southeastern Ukraine, according to the region's authorities, and at least one person was injured, although this number may increase. 2 cruise missiles aimed at Zaporizhia passed over the nuclear power plant. At 9 a.m. local time, the shelling ceased. The Russians have been trying to capture this facility almost from the beginning of the war in Ukraine. A similar attack took place yesterday, then manoeuvring missiles flew over the nuclear power plant in Khmelnyk. The low-altitude rocket flight just above the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, where there are 7 nuclear reactors and a large amount of nuclear material, pose a huge risk. Rockets hitting nuclear facilities pose the risk of a nuclear disaster. Because of the growing threat, the authorities of towns in the south of Ukraine are preparing for a potential attack by Russian troops. We have to prepare. It is very important because the enemy is tricky. We do not know what his next steps will be. We must prepare to defend the city. We are building security measures that will save the lives of our soldiers and allow us effectively to defend the city. Meanwhile, in Mariupol, a port city that became a symbol of the war in Ukraine, the inhabitants began removing rubble from the destroyed city. We have to rebuild the city after this whole war game. See for yourself what it looks like. It's quiet now, but only for now. We lost everything, absolutely everything. Everything we've worked for. We just don't know what to do now, where to start. The district prosecutor's office in Kharkiv announced that the Russian invaders had created a concentration camp in occupied Volchansk in which they were torturing residents. On the other hand, Kryvyi Rih, the hometown of Vladimir Zelensky, which is an important industrial centre of Ukraine, is to be the next target of the Russian attack. I left my city on the 8th day of war, and 2 days later my husband died of heart problems. He was buried in the garden under a tree, as there were no vacancies in the cemetery. I have nowhere to go. I'm here with my sister. If they say everything is fine, I'll go home. From the beginning of the war, that is from the end of February to the beginning of March, about 150 to 200 people came to us every day. Now, because of the continuing armed conflict, the daily number of people flowing in is already over 500, 600 and sometimes even 1,000. We will accept as many people as we can. We will do everything to help those in need. We have concluded an agreement with the Russians on a green evacuation corridor, but the Russians blocked them completely. 10 buses and 6 ambulances drove up to their checkpoint. They kidnapped the head of this column, Marchuk Vladimir Vladimirovich. They fired on a humanitarian convoy. Then they started shooting our soldiers hiding behind this convoy. They used it as a shield, knowing our soldiers would not fire. Since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, Russian forces have lost over 22,000 soldiers, nearly 920 tanks and 340 aircraft and helicopters. And these are certainly not the last losses they will suffer. Ukrainians are defending the country tirelessly and are not going to stop. The morale and strength of the Ukrainian soldiers is incredible. The Russians are terrified by this, very surprised and amazed at this state of affairs. This is something we should follow by example, and Poland is doing very well here. The Russian troops sped up the operation only to delay the supply of new forces and weapons to the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians have done their homework and are always half a step ahead of the Russian troops. Since the beginning of the invasion in Ukraine, Poland has been supporting its eastern neighbour. Both the state and ordinary citizens are involved in helping. As I have the opportunity to talk to Polish friends, for everything Poland has done for our nation, I bow my head to every Pole, to your authority and to you personally. Please accept our gratitude. Receive our bow. We see, know and feel your brotherly help. We will be happy if we can help too. According to the United Nations, almost 30 million Ukrainians have already left their homes as a result of the Russian invasion, and almost 8 million of them are internally displaced persons, that is, people who did not leave Ukraine. In turn, over 5 million people have already left their country, and over 2 million have found refuge in Poland. It is the biggest migration crisis in the modern world. On the second day of his trip to India, Polish Foreign Minister Zbigniew Rau recalled Poland and India's shared tragic experience with foreign imperialism during a news conference in New Delhi today.
Both Poland and India has had tragic experience with foreign imperialism, and it's difficult, it's very difficult not to see the present aggression against Ukraine as an attempt to restore the Russian empire.
Both Poland and India have had a tragic experience with foreign imperialism, and it's very difficult, not to see the present aggression against Ukraine as an attempt to restore the Russian Empire. Although Poland and India have reacted differently to the invasion, with India, for example, abstaining from the UN General Assembly resolution calling for Russia to be suspended from the Human Rights Council. Along with other European leaders like his Lithuanian and Luxembourg counterparts, Rao also took part in the Resina Dialogue International Conference. Poland has a special way of integrating and accommodating Ukrainian refugees, he told a panel on the state of play in the European Union. We don't have any refugee camps. The whole idea was to persuade the Poles to open their homes and their hearts to our Ukrainian neighbours, he said. While accommodating nearly 3 million refugees was a challenge, Rao said Poland managed to create a home for them, enabling them to join our labour market, our social security system, our medical services, and also our market as entrepreneurs. Rao outlined a dilemma European leaders were currently facing amid the Russia-Ukraine war, saying that many were dealing with the question of how to protect the most basic human values and the economic well-being of their societies at the same time. Rao will travel to India on Monday, marking the first visit of a Polish foreign minister to India in 9 years. And there's breaking news now that Russia has just suspended gas supplies to Poland under the Yamal contract. A crisis team is being installed at the Ministry of Climate. Gazprom has not yet officially spoken on the matter. At the end of March, President Putin demanded that countries hostile to Russia buying gas under the Yamal contract pay for the gas only in rubles. The European Commission decided that such a procedure would violate the restrictions imposed on Russia. Hence Poland's decision not to comply with the Kremlin's demands. Piotr Naimski, the government plenipotentiary for strategic energy infrastructure, when asked by journalists whether the Polish government would pay for gas in rubles, replied briefly, "We will not pay." Therefore, the decision of the Russians to suspend supplies to Poland may be related to that refusal. However, we have to wait for confirmation in an official statement by one of the parties. That's the news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us for the weather, Poland Daily Business and more programmes. But from me, have a good night and a better tomorrow.